The wind howled across the frozen road like a wild animal. Snow was falling so heavily that even the trees looked like white ghosts in the night. The small mountain town was silent, almost buried under thick layers of snow. No one was outside. Everyone had locked their doors, sitting close to their fireplaces, praying for the storm to end. But one man was still out there, John Miller, a single father. He was driving his old pickup truck slowly through the white fog, his hands tight on the steering wheel. On the seat beside him sat his best friend, a golden retriever named Max. Max was more than just a pet. He was John's only companion since his wife had passed away 3 years ago. John looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was almost 9:30 p.m. The grocery store had closed early because of the blizzard, but John had managed to grab some food, milk, and dog treats before heading back home. His little daughter Lily was staying with her grandmother in the city this week. That made John feel a little better tonight. At least she was safe, warm, and far away from this storm. The wipers struggled to clear the windshield, but the snow kept coming faster. The headlights of the truck cut through the darkness only for a few feet ahead. Every now and then, Max would lift his head and stare outside, his ears twitching at every strange sound. John turned to him and said softly, "Easy, buddy. We'll be home soon." But Max didn't calm down. His nose pressed against the window. He growled quietly. Something out there caught his attention. John frowned. "What is it, Max?" He slowed the truck. The tires crunched against the ice. Then he saw it. Faint red and blue lights flashing far ahead, almost buried under snow. At first he thought it was just a reflection, but as he drove closer he realized it was a police car. Half covered in white powder, the driver's door open. Lights blinking weakly through the storm. His heart began to pound. Oh no, someone's in trouble. He parked the truck to the side and grabbed his coat. The cold hit him like a wall the moment he stepped outside. The wind stung his face and snow filled his boots as he pushed forward through the thick drifts. Max followed close behind, barking once, his fur already covered in frost. The police car's front end was smashed into a tree. The windows were frosted and the engine was silent. John shouted, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But the wind swallowed his voice. He tried again, louder this time. "Police officer, can you hear me?" No answer, only the storm. He leaned closer to the open door, and then he saw her. A young woman in a police uniform, slumped over the steering wheel. Her face was pale, her hair wet from melting snow. There was blood on her cheek, frozen in thin lines. "Dear God," John whispered. He quickly checked her neck for a pulse. It was faint, but still there. She was alive, barely. "Hang in there," he said, pulling off his gloves. His fingers were shaking from the cold, but he managed to lift her head gently. "You're gonna be okay." Max barked again, circling around them nervously. The dog's warm breath fogged the air. He sniffed the woman's hand and whined softly, as if begging her to wake up. John looked around. No other cars, no houses, no lights. The blizzard was getting worse by the minute. He pulled out his phone, no signal. He cursed under his breath. There was no way to call for help out here. He wrapped his coat around the officer and tried to lift her out of the seat. She was freezing cold like ice. Her name tag said Officer Claire. "Come on, Claire. Don't give up on me now," he muttered as he carried her toward his truck. The wind pushed against him, snow hitting his face, but he didn't stop. His boots slipped on the ice, his breath coming out in short bursts. Max barked and walked ahead, guiding the way through the white storm. By the time they reached the truck, John was exhausted. He laid her carefully on the passenger seat and rubbed her arms to keep her warm. Max jumped in the back and licked her hand again. "Good boy," John said, trying to smile through the fear. "We got her. Now we just need to get home." He turned the key but the engine didn't start. He tried again. Nothing. The cold had killed the battery. For a moment, John just sat there staring at the steering wheel. His heart raced. The storm roared louder outside, shaking the truck. Claire's breathing was shallow. He looked at Max. The dog was watching him, waiting for what to do next. John took a deep breath. "All right, buddy," he said softly. "We're not leaving her here." He wrapped Claire tightly in a blanket, lifted her in his arms again, and stepped back into the storm. Max followed. Their cabin was about half a mile away. Not far, but in this weather it felt like a lifetime. Each step was a battle. The snow reached his knees and the wind almost pushed him back. But John kept going, his arms burning, his mind focused on one thing: saving her. When he finally saw the faint outline of his cabin through the storm, his legs nearly gave out from relief. He pushed the door open, stumbled inside, and laid Claire near the fireplace. Max shook off the snow and barked twice, as if saying, "We did it." John knelt beside the unconscious officer, his breath heavy, his hands trembling. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're going to be okay." Outside, the storm kept raging, but inside that small cabin, something powerful had begun, a fight for life, courage, and destiny, and neither John nor Max knew that this was just the beginning. Inside the small wooden cabin, the air was still cold, but at least there was shelter from the roaring storm. John kicked the door shut behind him, snow falling from his shoulders as he carried the unconscious police officer toward the fireplace. He laid her gently on an old couch near the hearth. Her skin was almost blue from the cold and her lips trembled slightly. Max stood close, watching every move, his tail low, his eyes full of worry. John quickly threw some wood into the fireplace and struck a match. The fire caught slowly, then burst into a warm orange glow. He rubbed his hands together and turned back to the woman. "All right, you're safe now," he said softly. "Let's warm you up." He grabbed a blanket from the sofa and wrapped it around her tightly. Then he poured some water from a kettle and placed it near the fire to heat. The room started to fill with a faint warmth, but the storm outside still screamed like an angry monster. John looked at her uniform. Her badge was bent, half covered in snow. He brushed it clean and read the name aloud. "Officer Claire Miller, State Police," he sighed. "What were you doing out here in the middle of a blizzard, Officer Miller?" Max whimpered softly and nudged John's leg. The dog looked toward Claire, then back at him, as if asking John to help her faster. "I'm trying, boy," John whispered. He took off her wet gloves and checked her fingers. They were cold and stiff. He rubbed them gently between his palms to bring some life back. He also noticed a small cut on her forehead, bleeding slightly again after the warmth hit her skin. He cleaned it with a piece of cloth soaked in warm water. After a few minutes, her breathing started to slow and steady. Her chest moved weakly but regularly now. John leaned closer. "Can you hear me?" he asked quietly. For a long moment, there was nothing, only the crackling sound of the fire and the whistling of wind outside. Then her lips moved faintly. Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in my cabin," John replied. "You crashed your car on the North Road. I found you just in time." Her eyes fluttered open, soft brown eyes full of confusion. "The road," she murmured. He ran into the woods." "Who did?" John asked quickly, but before she could answer, she winced in pain and closed her eyes again. Her hand weakly grabbed his sleeve. "Don't let him find me." Then she went silent again. John froze. His heart started to pound harder. "What does that mean?" he muttered. He looked at Max, who tilted his head, sensing the tension. John glanced toward the window. Snow still beat against the glass, but now he felt something else in the air. A strange uneasiness. Someone was out there. He shook the thought away for a moment and focused back on Claire. He gently placed a pillow under her head and checked her wounds again. Her uniform had a dark red stain near her shoulder. She must have been hurt before the crash. He carefully pressed a clean cloth on it to stop the bleeding. Hours passed slowly. The fire burned brighter and warmth finally filled the room. The storm outside began to calm a little, though the wind still whispered through the cracks of the old cabin walls. John sat beside Claire, drinking some warm tea. Max lay next to her, his head resting near her hand. Every few minutes, the dog would lift his eyes to check on her, then sigh softly, as if guarding her in his own way. John's mind kept replaying her words. "Don't let him find me." Who was she talking about? Was there someone else out there in the blizzard? Someone dangerous? He walked to the window and looked out. All he could see was darkness, snow, and trees bending in the wind. But deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. He turned away and grabbed his old radio from the shelf. Maybe he could contact the nearby ranger station or police. But when he switched it on, there was only static. The antenna had snapped last winter and he hadn't fixed it yet. "Great," he muttered. We're completely cut off. Max's ears twitched suddenly. He stood up and growled softly toward the door. What is it, boy? John asked, his voice dropping. The dog took a few steps closer to the door, sniffing the air, tail straight and stiff. John felt his stomach tighten. He walked quietly to the window again and peeked outside. At first there was nothing, just white snow and darkness. But then, a faint flash of light. It disappeared quickly, like someone turning off a flashlight. John's breath caught in his throat. He whispered, "Someone's out there." He quickly closed the curtains and went to check on Claire again. She was still unconscious, breathing softly. He placed another log on the fire and sat down, but his eyes kept shifting toward the door. The minutes passed, heavy and slow. Max refused to lie down, standing guard instead. John looked at the clock, 1 a.m. He hadn't slept, but he couldn't. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his bones. He looked again at Claire, lying helplessly under the blanket. "Who are you running from?" he whispered. Max growled again, louder this time. Outside the wind had stopped, but the silence was even worse. And in that silence, John heard it. Faint footsteps crunching in the snow. Someone was there. John froze. The sound of footsteps outside the cabin sent a cold shiver down his spine. For a moment he thought maybe it was just the wind shifting the snow, but then he heard it again. Crunch, crunch, slow, heavy steps moving closer to the door. Max stood near the door, growling softly, his fur rising. His ears pointed forward, his eyes fixed on the dark wooden frame as if he could see through it. John quietly reached for the small hunting rifle he kept near the fireplace. He didn't want to use it. He hadn't fired it in years, but tonight, he might have no choice. He whispered, "I stay close. Boy." The footsteps stopped. Silence. Only the faint crackle of fire inside the cabin. Then a knock. 3 slow, dull knocks that echoed in the still night. John's pulse raced. He looked at Claire. She was still unconscious, wrapped in the blanket, her face pale but calm. He didn't want to scare her or wake her up in panic. He took a deep breath and shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. He waited, gripping the rifle tighter. "Answer me," he said again, louder this time. After a long pause, a voice came through the door. Weak, tired, almost shaking. "Help, please. I'm lost. My car broke down." John hesitated. The voice sounded desperate, maybe even honest. But something inside him didn't feel right. He looked at Max. The dog wasn't calm. He was still growling, teeth slightly visible. Max had never been wrong about people. John slowly moved toward the window and lifted the curtain just a little. Outside, through the blur of snow, he saw a tall shadow standing a few feet from the door. The person was wearing a dark coat, face hidden under a hood. John lowered the curtain quickly. His gut told him this man wasn't just lost. He shouted again, "There's no help here. Go back to the road. You'll find a ranger station a mile north." The voice outside paused for a few seconds. Then it replied in a colder tone, "You sure about that?" John's blood ran cold. He stepped back from the door and whispered, "Max, stay alert." Suddenly something hit the door. Thud. John jumped. Max barked furiously. The man outside tried the handle, shaking it hard, but John had locked it earlier. "Go away," John shouted. "I'm armed!" The door rattled again, and then silence. John waited, heart pounding, listening carefully. After a minute, the footsteps started fading away into the snow. He lowered his gun slowly and let out a shaky breath. "That's right. Keep walking," he muttered. Max sniffed near the door and whimpered once, still uneasy. John looked toward the window again. The figure was gone. The snowstorm had covered the tracks quickly. But deep inside, he knew, that wasn't just a stranger looking for help. That man was the one Claire had been running from. He turned back to her. "You weren't lying, were you?" he whispered. He checked her again. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The warmth from the fire had helped, but she was still weak. Her shoulder wound had started bleeding again, the red stain spreading across her uniform. John moved fast. He grabbed his first aid box and cleaned the wound carefully. He pressed a bandage on it, then tightened it with a piece of cloth. "You're going to make it," he said quietly. "I promise." After that, he sat beside her, rubbing his tired eyes. It was almost 3 a.m. now. The firewood pile was running low and the storm didn't look like it would end anytime soon. He thought about the man outside. If that was really the suspect Claire was chasing. Then he could come back. Maybe with a weapon, maybe angry. John knew he couldn't just stay and wait. He had to get Claire to a safe place and somewhere she could get medical help before it was too late. He looked around the cabin. There was a sled in the shed behind the house, old but still strong enough to carry someone. If the truck engine was frozen, the sled was their only chance. He stood up and looked at Max. "All right, boy," he said firmly. "We're taking her to the ranger post at sunrise. You lead the way." Max wagged his tail once, as if understanding. John packed some food, water, a flashlight, and extra blankets. Then he sat beside Claire again and whispered, "Hang in there, Officer Miller. Just a few more hours." As he sat there waiting for dawn, he couldn't help but think about his daughter Lily. If she were here, he'd never forgive himself for not trying harder. He remembered his wife's last words before she died. Always help others no matter what. Those words echoed in his mind now. Outside, the snow began to calm. The wind slowed down. A faint orange light of morning touched the horizon. It was time. John wrapped Claire carefully in the thickest blanket, covering her head and shoulders. He lifted her gently. She was still weak and cold. Max barked softly, standing by the door, ready. John opened the cabin door slowly, looking out. The world was quiet again, white, endless, and still. He placed Claire on the sled and tied it securely with ropes. Max took position ahead, sniffing the air, alert for any danger. John took one last look at his cabin, his only home. Then he turned toward the frozen road and began to pull the sled forward. Every breath turned into mist. Every step crunched in the snow. Behind them, far in the distance, a dark figure appeared at the edge of the woods, watching them silently. John didn't see it, but Max did. The dog growled low, eyes glowing with warning. The real chase had just begun. The morning light was weak and cold. The storm had stopped, but the air was still heavy with ice and silence. John pulled the sled slowly through the thick snow, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. Max trotted ahead, his golden fur shining faintly under the pale sunlight, nose low to the ground, guiding the way. On the sled, wrapped in layers of blankets, Officer Claire Miller lay still. Her face looked calmer now, but her skin was still pale. Every few minutes, John glanced back to make sure she was breathing. "Just hang in there," he whispered. "We're almost there." But almost there was still far away. The nearest ranger station was more than 2 miles from his cabin, 2 miles through frozen forest and icy roads. John tightened his grip on the sled rope and kept moving. Each step was hard. The snow was deep and his legs were tired from the long night. The wind had left his cheeks red and raw, but he didn't stop. Behind them, far in the woods, the dark figure was still there, following quietly, step by step. Max stopped suddenly and turned his head, ears raised. He growled low in his throat. John froze. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Not even a bird's sound. John squinted at the line of trees behind them, but all he saw was endless white. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe he was just tired. He sighed. "Come on, Max, we can't waste time." They started moving again, snow crunching beneath their boots. After half an hour, they reached a narrow bridge crossing a frozen stream. The wooden boards creaked under John's weight. The sled glided slowly behind him. Halfway across, Max began barking wildly. "Max, what is it?" A loud crack echoed through the air. The bridge shook. One of the planks broke beneath the sled's weight. John jumped forward, pulling the rope with all his strength as the back end of the sled dipped dangerously close to the icy water below. Claire slid sideways, almost falling off. "No, hold on," John shouted, grabbing the sled and pulling again. With a final desperate tug, the sled came free, scraping across the wood. John fell backward into the snow, gasping for breath. He looked at Claire. She was still on the sled, safe but unconscious. "That was too close," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. Max barked twice, as if saying, "Let's go before it gets worse." They crossed the rest of the bridge carefully and stepped onto solid ground again. John took a deep breath of cold air. But just as they started moving forward, a distant gunshot echoed through the valley. Bang! John froze. Max barked loudly, spinning around to face the direction of the sound. The echo faded quickly, leaving only the whisper of the wind. John's heart pounded. "Someone's following us," he said quietly. He crouched down beside Claire, checking her pulse, still weak but steady. He covered her more tightly with the blanket and whispered, "Don't worry, you're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." He looked around, eyes scanning the snowy forest. The trees stood tall and still, hiding whoever was out there. He knew he had to move faster. "Come on, Max," he said, pulling the rope harder. "Let's finish this." The path ahead led uphill through the woods. Snow crunched beneath his boots and the air burned in his lungs. Max ran ahead, sniffing the path and stopping now and then to look back. As they climbed, John noticed footprints behind them. Fresh footprints. Someone was following close and fast. His stomach twisted in fear. "He's here," he whispered. Suddenly, another gunshot rang out. The snow beside the sled exploded in a puff of white. John dropped to the ground, pulling the sled behind a fallen tree for cover. Max barked furiously, running in front of him, ready to protect. "Stay down," John shouted to Claire, though she couldn't hear him. The forest fell silent again. No more shots, only the sound of John's heart beating in his ears. He peeked over the log. A tall man in a dark coat was moving between the trees, holding a pistol. His face was partly covered by a scarf. John recognized him instantly from the police reports he had seen months ago. It was Ethan Cole, a wanted fugitive, the man who had attacked the officers near town. He must have been the one Claire was chasing before her car crashed. John ducked back down and whispered, "It's him." "The man she was afraid of," Max growled again, ready to charge. But John held his collar tightly. "Not yet, boy. Not now." He looked at the sled. He couldn't fight and protect Claire at the same time. He had to make a choice and escape or stand his ground. He thought fast. The ranger post wasn't far now, maybe half a mile. If he could distract the man long enough, Max could lead the sled to safety. John looked into Max's eyes. "You know what to do, buddy?" Max wagged his tail slightly as if he understood every word. John whispered, "Take her to the road. Get her help. Go." He untied the rope from his waist and pointed toward the trail. Max barked once, then started pulling the sled away, moving as fast as his strong legs could in the snow. John waited until they were out of sight. Then he stood up and ran the other way, making noise to draw the man's attention. "Hey, over here!" he shouted. A gunshot followed instantly. The bullet hit the tree beside him. Bark and snow exploded in his face. John ducked and ran deeper into the woods, his boots slipping on ice, heart pounding. He could hear the man's footsteps chasing him. He didn't look back. He just kept running, praying that Max and Claire would reach the ranger station before it was too late. The snowstorm might have stopped, but the real fight for survival had just begun. The sound of gunfire still echoed, faintly through the frozen forest as John ran. His heart pounded in his chest, every breath burning his lungs. The snow was deep, the trees thick and behind him. The sound of boots crushing ice grew louder. Ethan Cole was close. Too close. John ducked behind a large pine tree, panting heavily. Snowflakes clung to his hair and coat. He gripped his rifle tightly, but his hands were trembling from the cold and fear. Somewhere far behind, Max was pulling the sled with all his strength, paws slicing through the snow, breath coming out in white clouds. Officer Claire lay wrapped in the blanket, her face pale but peaceful. "Go, Max," John whispered under his breath, hoping the dog could somehow hear him.
"Keep her safe." Then, a voice echoed through the woods. "You can't run forever, old man."
Ethan shouted, his tone dark and mocking. "I just want what's mine. Give me the girl and I'll let you live." John pressed his back to the tree, staying quiet. He could hear the crunch of Ethan's boots drawing closer. He whispered to himself, "Not a chance." Ethan's voice came again, slower now, colder. "She saw too much. You shouldn't have helped her. Now you'll die for it." John peeked from behind the tree and then froze. Ethan was only 30 feet away, scanning the forest with his pistol raised. John knew he couldn't outrun him. The snow was too deep, his body too tired. There was only one choice left, face him. He took a deep breath and shouted, "Hey, you want me? Come get me." Ethan turned quickly and fired. Bang! The bullet whizzed past John's shoulder, hitting a tree trunk. John dropped to the ground and fired back once, the sound echoing through the valley. His shot missed, but it startled Ethan long enough for John to roll behind another fallen log. "Not bad for a single dad," Ethan yelled, laughing cruelly. "But you'll have to do better than that." John's mind raced. He was running out of options. If he died here, no one would reach Claire in time. He needed to buy Max at least a few more minutes. He grabbed a rock from the ground and threw it far to the left. The sound made Ethan turn his head. John used the moment to run again, heading downhill toward the river. Branches whipped against his face. His legs ached, but he didn't stop. The cold air cut through his lungs. He could hear Ethan shouting behind him, chasing relentlessly. Meanwhile, a mile away, Max was running with everything he had. The sled bounced over the uneven snow, but he didn't slow down. His paws were bleeding from ice cuts, yet he kept going. His eyes locked on the faint shape of the ranger station ahead. Inside the sled, Claire groaned weakly. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. Where am I?" she whispered. Max barked once as if to tell her, "You're safe." Almost there. Then from the woods behind them, another sound echoed. Faint but terrifying. Footsteps. Someone else was following. Max looked back and saw a shadow moving fast between the trees. His fur stood up instantly. It wasn't John, it was Ethan. Somehow the fugitive had circled around through the forest. He was coming straight for them. Max barked loudly, pulling the sled faster. The ranger station was now visible in the distance, a small wooden building with a radio tower. But it was still too far. Ethan raised his pistol and aimed. Just then, John burst out from the woods behind him, shouting, "Over here!" Ethan spun around. Another gunshot rang out. Bang! The bullet hit a tree beside John, splintering bark into his face. John fired back. This time his bullet grazed Ethan's arm. The man screamed in rage and dropped his gun for a second. Max barked and ran faster, pulling the sled toward safety. Claire, half awake, saw John through the blur of snow. "Don't stop him," she whispered weakly. John ducked behind a log and shouted, "Keep going, Max. Go!" Ethan picked up his gun again, aiming straight at John. "You're a fool!" he yelled. But before he could shoot, Max charged back. Out of nowhere, the golden retriever leapt through the snow, biting Ethan's arm hard. The gun fell again. Ethan screamed, trying to shake Max off, but the dog wouldn't let go. John saw his chance. He ran forward and tackled Ethan to the ground. They rolled in the snow, punching, kicking, fighting with everything they had. Ethan grabbed a rock and struck John on the shoulder, sending pain shooting through his arm. John groaned but fought back, slamming Ethan into the ice. Finally, with a desperate push, John pinned Ethan down and grabbed the fallen pistol. He pointed it at him, chest heaving. "Don't move," John growled. Ethan froze, breathing hard, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You've got no idea what's coming." John kept the gun steady. "It's over for you." Just then, Max barked loudly again, this time from near the ranger station. The sound of an engine started. John looked up and saw two snowmobiles racing toward them. Rangers. Claire must have woken up enough to signal for help. Relief washed over him like a wave. Ethan tried to lunge forward, but John struck him once with the gun's handle, knocking him out cold. When the Rangers reached them minutes later, John was kneeling in the snow, exhausted, his coat torn, his hands shaking. Max sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, his muzzle covered with frost. The officers quickly handcuffed Ethan and lifted him onto one of the snowmobiles. Another ranger rushed to check Claire, who was now awake but weak. She looked at John with tired eyes and whispered, "You saved me." John smiled faintly. "No," he said softly. "He did." He nodded toward Max. The dog barked once, as if proud, as the Rangers prepared to take them back to town. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day, lighting the snow with a golden glow. John looked up at the sky and whispered, "It's finally over." But deep down he knew some storms don't end easily, and some scars stay forever. The rescue team drove through the blizzard with their snowmobiles, carrying everyone back to the small mountain town. The storm was finally dying down, but the sky was still heavy and gray. John sat in the back of the ranger vehicle beside Max, who was wrapped in a blanket. The loyal dog leaned against John's leg, eyes half closed from exhaustion. Claire sat on the other side, weak but awake. Her cheeks were pale, her lips trembling slightly, but she managed to smile. "You risked everything," she whispered, "for someone you didn't even know." John looked out the window, watching the snowy trees pass by. "Anyone would have done the same," he said softly. "Besides, Max made the real decisions. I just followed him." Claire smiled faintly, whispering, "Then you've got a hero for a partner." Max wagged his tail gently, as if understanding her words. When they reached the town, The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and orange. The streets were quiet. Most people were still inside, waiting for the storm to end completely. At the small medical center, the rangers helped Claire inside for treatment. John stayed outside with Max, leaning against the truck, tired but relieved. His fingers were numb, his back ached, but his heart finally felt light. He watched the nurses rush Claire inside and thought, "It's finally over," but deep inside something didn't feel right. One of the rangers, a tall man with a short beard, walked over to him. "You did a brave thing out there, sir," he said. "The department will want to thank you personally once things settle down." John nodded. "Just glad she's alive." The ranger smiled. "You should go home, get warm. We'll take care of everything from here." John glanced at Max, who gave a small bark, almost as if agreeing. "Yeah, I think we've had enough excitement for one night," he said. They started walking back toward John's truck, which had been towed to town earlier by the rangers. The snow crunched softly under their boots, but then Max stopped. His ears perked up, his eyes locked on something across the street. John followed his gaze. A man stood near the edge of the streetlight, half hidden by the falling snow. He wore a long, dark coat and a gray hat pulled low over his eyes. His face was shadowed, but his posture was tense, like he was watching them. John frowned. "Can I help you?" he called out. The man didn't reply. He just turned and slowly walked away, disappearing behind a building. Max growled quietly. John looked down at him. "Easy, boy. Probably just someone passing by." But deep down, he wasn't sure. That night, after returning home, John lit the fireplace and sat on the old couch with Max beside him. The cabin was warm again, filled with the smell of burning wood. He poured himself a cup of coffee, though his hands still shook slightly from the cold. He looked at Max and said quietly, "It's over now, buddy. We did what we could." Max laid his head on John's lap, eyes half closed. But outside, the wind still whispered through the trees, carrying faint sounds that didn't belong, footsteps crunching softly in the snow. John stood up slowly and looked out the window. Nothing but darkness and falling snow. He turned off the light and sat back down. Maybe it was just his imagination. Maybe he was too tired. The next morning, John woke up to a knock on the door. He opened it to find a police officer standing there. Not Claire, but a tall man with gray eyes and a calm voice. "Mr. Harris?" the man asked. "Yes. I'm Detective Owens from the county department," the man said, flashing his badge. "We've been reviewing what happened last night. The suspect, Ethan Cole, was taken into custody, but..." He paused, glancing down at his notebook. "Something strange happened." John's stomach tightened. "Strange? What do you mean?" "The transport vehicle that was taking Cole to the city was attacked. The guards are fine, but Cole escaped again." John's eyes widened. "What?" Owens nodded slowly. "We think he had help from someone on the inside. Maybe another accomplice. We're still investigating." Max growled quietly from behind John's legs. Owens looked down at the dog. "That's a smart one," he said softly. "Keep him close." John's mind raced. He thought about the man in the dark coat he saw last night. Was that Ethan's accomplice? Had he been watching them already? Before John could ask more questions, Owens's radio crackled. A voice came through. "Detective, we found tire tracks near the edge of the forest. Looks like a snowmobile heading north." Owens looked at John. "That direction leads straight to your cabin area." John froze. "You mean he's coming back?" Owens nodded grimly. "It's possible. Don't leave town until we know more." The detective walked away, leaving John standing in the doorway, cold wind blowing against his face. Max whined softly, sensing his master's unease. John knelt down, running his hand through the dog's fur. "Looks like we're not done yet, boy," he murmured. "We might have another storm coming." Outside, the clouds began to gather again, dark and heavy, as if the mountain itself was warning them of what was next. Somewhere out there, hidden among the trees, a figure watched the cabin from afar. The same man in the gray hat. He pulled out a small radio, his voice low and sharp. "They found her," he said, "but not for long." Then he disappeared into the woods, leaving only footprints that the snow quickly swallowed. Snow was falling again, quiet but heavy, covering the small town like a white blanket. Inside the police hospital, Officer Claire Miller slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, everything was blurry. White walls, a faint beeping sound, and the soft hum of the heater in the corner. Her head throbbed, and her lips were dry. But when she turned slightly, she saw a familiar face sitting beside her bed. John Harris. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but when he saw her awake, a small, warm smile spread across his face. "You're awake," he said softly. Claire tried to speak, but her voice came out weak. "How long was I out?" "Almost a day," John replied. "The doctor said you needed rest." "You lost a lot of blood out there." Claire glanced around. "Where's Max?" John chuckled quietly. "Sleeping in the truck. He hasn't left my side since we got back." Claire smiled faintly. "He's a brave one." Then her expression turned serious. "What about Ethan?" "The man who attacked us." John hesitated. His jaw tightened slightly. "He escaped again." Claire's eyes widened. "What? How?" "Police were transporting him last night. Someone ambushed the vehicle. He got away." For a moment, the room went silent except for the soft beep of the heart monitor. Claire clenched her fists weakly. "He's not going to stop. He's obsessed. I arrested his brother last year. That's why he targeted me. He wants revenge." John's heart sank. "Then you're still in danger." Claire nodded slowly. "And now, you are too." Later that evening, after the nurses checked her vitals and left, Claire sat up in bed and stared out the window. Snowflakes tapped softly against the glass, and the wind whispered through the trees outside. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Her instincts, the same ones that had saved her many times before, screamed that Ethan wasn't far. She reached for the phone beside her bed and dialed John's number. He answered on the second ring. "John, it's me," she said quietly. "Hey, you should be resting." "I can't." "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice serious. "Ethan isn't working alone. He has help, someone inside the department. That's how he escaped so fast." John's chest tightened. "You mean one of your own men?" "Yes," she whispered. "Someone with access to radio codes and prisoner routes. That's how they planned the ambush." There was silence for a few seconds. Then John said, "You think he might come for you again?" Claire took a deep breath. "Not just me. He knows where I was rescued. He might come for you too." That night, John sat in his cabin again. The fire crackled softly, casting golden light on the wooden walls. Max lay near the hearth, but his ears twitched now and then, as if he heard something outside. John checked the locks twice, then peered through the frosted window. The world outside was quiet, too quiet. He thought about what Claire said. A traitor inside the police, a killer still out there, and now the storm beginning again. He turned back to Max. "We'll keep watch tonight, boy." The dog wagged his tail but didn't move from his spot. Hours passed. The fire burned lower and the cabin grew dim. John's eyes were closing when Max suddenly jumped up, growling deep in his throat. John grabbed his flashlight and rifle. "What is it?" he whispered. Max ran to the door, barking once, sharp and loud. Then came the sound. Crunch, crunch. Footsteps in the snow. John's pulse quickened. He turned off the light and moved to the window. A shadow moved near the edge of the forest, and tall, slow, careful. He whispered, "No. It can't be." The figure stopped near the cabin door. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then 3 hard knocks echoed through the still air. Knock, knock, knock. Max growled louder now, teeth bared. John aimed his rifle at the door and shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. He stepped closer. "If you don't speak, I'll call the police." A calm voice replied from outside. "John Harris? I'm Detective Owens. I need to talk to you." John hesitated. Owens. The same detective who had warned him earlier about Ethan's escape? He slowly opened the door, just a crack, and saw the familiar gray coat, the police badge hanging from his neck. "Detective Owens?" John asked. The man nodded. "Yes, sorry to bother you this late. But we found new evidence. We think we know who helped Ethan escape." John lowered his rifle slightly, but still felt uneasy. "Come in, it's cold out there." Owen stepped inside, brushing snow off his coat. The warmth of the fire filled the cabin again. He sat down across from John, eyes calm, voice steady. "You did a brave thing out there, saving that officer. The department won't forget that." John nodded. "I just did what anyone would do." Owen smiled faintly. Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger. There was a strange silence after that. Max stood still, staring at the detective, not growling but watching carefully. His tail didn't move. John noticed it. Max never acted like that unless something was wrong. Then, from Owens's pocket, something shiny slipped out and hit the floor. A small metal badge with the name Ethan Cole engraved on it. John froze. Owens looked down at it slowly, then back up with a cold smile. "I guess the game's over, John." John's heart pounded. "You're not a detective." Owens' voice changed, deeper and cruel. "Smart man. I was his handler. Ethan and I planned everything, but you ruined it." Before John could react, Owens pulled out a pistol and aimed it straight at him. Max barked furiously, leaping forward. Owens fired. Bang! The bullet missed, shattering a lantern on the wall. John rolled behind the table, grabbing his rifle. "Max, down!" Smoke filled the cabin, the smell of gunpowder mixing with burning wood. The storm outside grew louder, as if the mountain itself was screaming. 2 men, 1 loyal dog, 1 killer, trapped in a small cabin in the middle of a blizzard. And this time there was no rescue team on the way.